So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us in the latest in the Lockdown Your Learning series from Technology Ireland, ICT SkillNet. My name is Paul Hearns. I'm a journalist and commentator for more than 20 years in ICT. And today we are going to be talking about high-performance sales teams and cultures. Just to remind you that a number of important and interesting topics have been covered already in the Lockdown Your Learning series, and they're all available to watch back on the YouTube channel, which you can access from ictskillnet.ie. And there's a link there from the homepage for both the upcoming sessions in the series and for the YouTube channel where you have the previous versions. So today, we're talking about creating high-performance sales cultures to thrive in constant customer change and complexity. So this is an emerging issue, and I have to say it's not a core domain area for me, so it's going to be a double school experience for me. But average close rates of just 20% are now being seen, and 40% of deals can stagnate in today's B2B environment. So sales teams are struggling to meet quotas and to grow revenues. So here to talk about this today is Danny O'Neill, who is founder and CEO of Animus Labs, who offer services in these areas. So Danny has more than 20 years of experience in B2B sales and business transformation and training, both domestically and internationally. So just the format for today, Danny is going to do a presentation, first of all, with a slide deck, where he's going to talk us through a bit of context and the issues and what's happening in this area. So once that's finished, then we'll go into a discussion conversation, and we'll have some polls for you as well. So if you look at the options on your screen, you'll have a Q&A button, and you can click that and enter a text question there, and I will have that open, and I'll be referring to that through the discussion portion. You also have the option to attract the producer's attention, and our producer Donna today will be able to open your mic and allow you to ask a question directly if you so choose. So do take advantage of that, and please do ask any questions you might have. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Danny, and he is going to share his screen and begin his presentation. Danny.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me here today. Delighted to be speaking to you all. As Paul said, my name is Danny O'Neill. I'm founder and CEO of Animus Labs. We founded Animus Labs just over 2 years ago, and we're a software platform and services company working mostly with small to medium businesses in the technology sector. And most of those businesses we deal with talk to us a lot about some of the challenges they're facing in today's B2B selling world, right, where they find a lot of complexity, a lot of challenge in actually engaging with customers in such a way that they can grow revenue and succeed. So often or not, we're talking to them about best practice sales culture, sales processes, really getting them to think differently about how customers buy today. And we'll talk about that later on as we go through the presentation. Over the next 20 minutes or so, it's just to touch on 5 key areas. I want to firstly take a deep dive into what are the new realities that B2B sales teams are facing today. We talked a lot about complexity and change and how customers buy differently. And we'll also talk a little bit about the changing nature of customer expectations. Fundamentally, customers are much more powered than they have been in the past. And that has a lot of implications for how sales teams need to think about engaging with those customers. We'll then take a look at traditional sales processes and procedures, and perhaps why we need to take a fresh pair of eyes to look at some of the ways that we drive revenue performance in the past. And then I'll talk a little bit about the rise of revenue operations as a new operational model where we put the customer at the center of revenue operations. And then hopefully I'll leave you with some really practical takeaways to go back to your own businesses and to start to think about how you might implement a revenue operations function within your own business. So to look at those new realities, as I said, fundamentally, when we talk to our customers, and there's been lots of research done about this as well in the industry, particularly by Gartner and Deloitte, our customers are telling us that, things have fundamentally changed. Customers are very savvy, very technically aware, have access to huge amounts of information about, products and technologies and competitors and so on. And within that context, they have gained much greater control over the buying process than perhaps they would have had 5 to 10 years ago. And what we find is that the buying journey today has been pretty much decentralized from a single buying function. And what we see is are this formation of purchasing committees within companies. And those purchasing committees are typically made up of anything from 10 to 20 and even 30 stakeholders involved in the buying journey. So that introduces a huge amount of complexity, right? For sales teams, they literally have to think of a way to not only connect with buyers, right? Not only connect with them, but actually, how do they establish relationships with such a large group of decision makers? And not only that, how do they actually help guide and work with them through the phases of their buying journey? And the one thing we hear time and time again is that journey is no longer simple. It's no longer a linear experience. In fact, it's highly convoluted, highly complex, and teams are really struggling. As Paul alluded to in the introduction, we see over 50% of deals are now typically stagnating. And that's predominantly down to simply sales teams not able to drive those large groups of stakeholders towards a consent agreement even and consensus to move forward, make a decision, and actually steer them towards their own solutions or products that they're providing. That is a major problem. That is a fundamentally a different set of circumstances, different selling environment than teams would have experienced, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And within that, as Paul said earlier, we're seeing deal close rates on average about 20% across technology industries, some in fact quite lower than that. And we see, roughly half of B2B selling teams today are actually missing quota. And as a result of that, organizations have huge pressure on their top end performers to deliver more and more into the organization. So this is the new reality. Highly complex, highly dynamic, lots of stakeholders, very, very challenging for sales teams to actually navigate through that process and deliver a deal. And of course, COVID unfortunately has amplified all of these challenges as customers fundamentally have, either put projects on the back burner or they're striving to look for different strategies to help them, survive through COVID. And that in fact has really just amplified the complexity and change that B2B teams are facing. Customer expectations, particularly in the last 5 years, have fundamentally increased. We all probably experienced this. We're all very used to receiving lots of high quality sales messaging to our own in our own businesses, right? We get connected to on LinkedIn. We get brochures. We get insight documents. We get high quality commercial insights, etc. So the bar in terms of what the customer is expecting from sales teams, from vendors, has significantly increased. Today, customers are expecting tailored content specific to their industry, but also specific to their own particular company and the challenges that they may face in their own markets. And even further than that, different stakeholders in the decision-making group are expecting a tailored perspective for their particular function. So somebody in operations will expect a tailored message around value that your solution can offer versus somebody perhaps in finance or operations or marketing. So customers today really expect, if I'm going to engage with a vendor, they need to be highly responsive to my needs. They need to tailor that content specific to our company, and they need to deliver value at every single interaction. If we're going to take the time as a company to speak to a particular vendor, this is the new standard, the new bar that teams need to figure out how we're going to deliver this consistently. The great news is, and this is some really good research done by PwC, when surveyed, 86% of customers say they will spend as much as 18% more for a good experience, a good purchase experience. So customers are clearly saying, look, we need help in this complexity too. We're prepared to spend more with you for that experience. And that's a real indicator, I think, for where we need to go as a revenue function. Interestingly enough, some surveys done by Bain, a little older, indicates that only 8% of customers actually say they receive a good experience from vendors. And this is despite 80% of vendors thinking they do a good job when it comes to customer experience. So I think fundamentally from this, you can see we need to start to think differently. How are we as companies, as revenue generating functions, how are we going to start to think about working together to really meet these new expectations that customers have? So where are we today? If you take a step back for a moment and look at perhaps the way in fact most revenue generating organizations are set up today, they still align to this fairly traditional model where we have, essentially siloed business functions, each touching the customer as they move across the buying journey. So, we traditionally have marketing, sales development, we have the sales function, we now have customer success, which has grown greatly in the last number of years. And you can also add into this product, technology, and even partners are also involved in this process. The challenge with this, of course, as you can probably see, these teams are siloed. The customer experience is often very transactional in nature. So they feel, and they tell us this, they feel like they're being passed down through a process within the company. And often these teams are very focused on linear internal processes rather than aligning to actually how the customer thinks about buying solutions. And then probably the worst of all is we tend to see a lot of misaligned KPIs. An example of that being where marketing and sales development typically are focused on volume and number of leads that are generated and qualified for sales. But when you look at sales and you look at customer success, they're really keen to ensure that the leads that they're working on are actually good quality leads, right? That there's been a good job done so they can maximize the revenue outcome. So there's a contradiction, right? There's a clash. There's some friction between these organizations. And, from a customer experience point of view, that's just not going to cut it in this new world. To actually compound the problem further, I've just put two stats there just to highlight this. When you look at the attrition rates in B2B sales today, unfortunately, they're running at about 36% per annum. So there's also an engagement problem here where salespeople are actually getting frustrated in role. And that probably ties back to the 50% of them actually achieving target, right? That the frustration being born out of just not succeeding, right? And not actually achieving your goals. And the average amount of time in role today for a salesperson is 18 months. So very, very difficult to try and deliver that kind of customer experience that we've talked about when you've got such rates of attrition and obviously people staying in role for such a short period of time. Well, over the last three to 4 years, and particularly this year, we've seen an explosion in interest in creating what is called a revenue operations function. And we've really seen, as I said, only in the last 3 years, this gradually gain momentum. But since COVID, Google it, you will see the amount of sales events being run, even between now and Christmas, that are solely focused on helping companies implement and get to a revenue ops function is just incredible. It's exploded. Revenue ops essentially is a new business function that sits above the 4 traditional revenue generation functions and takes full responsibility for bringing those organizations together. And really, the goal is really, really simple. It's to make sure that all of those organizations are wrapped around the customer and are fully focused on the customer purchase lifecycle or the customer purchase experience across the end to end. They also want them to focus on building strategy and planning together. And they also want those teams to really think about how do you engage with customers no matter where they are in their own buying cycle, so that you can really closely understand what their requirements are, what their needs are, and then most importantly, that you can adapt and respond accordingly to meet those customer expectations. And I think the realization is, teams working in silos simply can never do that. The teams have to come together in a much more collaborative way so that they can align themselves much more closely to where the customer is in their buying journey, but also get a much deeper understanding of how to make decisions, who are those stakeholders we talked about earlier, what are the challenges and objectives, and importantly, what are the other competitors that are also engaged in this process? Because ultimately we know that, a salesperson, whether it's a account executive or an account lead, simply can't achieve that themselves. They need collaboration from other experts across the team. And I'd also add to this, this is where I believe product teams and technology teams need to come into the equation as well. This is where partners that are out there need to be brought into this process, so that, as I said, we're wrapping the customer in this ecosystem of experts, all working together with the view of delivering that high value experience at each touch point as the customer kind of moves across their buying journey. And key to this, of course, is making sure that the KPIs, the measures of success that we're going to implement into this new revenue ops process is a set of KPIs that all of the team have responsibility for and are aligned to. So we need to remove, as I mentioned earlier, those friction points, those different kind of measures of success that we currently see today across those different functions. I would say, firstly, if you are experiencing challenges with not just growing revenue to the extent that you would like, but actually are finding that you've got a great deal of deal stagnation, that your business close rates are low, that you're finding your sale is technical, is complex, and it does require better collaboration across your teams, I would say absolutely have a look to see how revenue ops and transitioning to a rev ops model can benefit your business. And the four things I'd call out to take a close look at are: one, the customer. Put the customer experience really at the center of your strategy and planning, not just sales strategy, but your entire strategy for revenue growth. Think to yourself, how geared is your organization to meet those new high standards that customers expect? Are you in a position to respond as a team and add value and create differentiation at each touch point? I'd also say take a look at your people. As I said, agility and responsiveness is absolutely key as part of this process. And we know the only way to achieve that on a consistent basis is really figuring out how do you bring those cross-functional teams together, because it's going to be about creating tailored strategy and planning. It's going to be working together to really make sure that customer engagement is creating that drive and that demand for your solutions that you need. I'd say also look at your processes and think not about linear internal sales processes, but think about how can you realign those processes to be much more closely linked to the customer buying journey. No point in your team talking one language and the customer talking a completely different one. You've got to put yourself in the shoes of the customer and engineer your team in that way. Focus on gaining deep insights into customer decision-making process. Look at how can you evaluate levels of consensus across those stakeholders. If you can gear your processes and your priorities around that, you'll gain much more control over the sales process. And then the fourth thing I would say and finish on is really to look at how you measure performance today. I would say you absolutely need to think about defining a set of KPIs that are common across those 4 or 5 teams. Really think about taking down those barriers between the difference between volume and quality. What are the 3-4 key indicators of success that marketing, sales development, sales, customer success, and maybe product and technical can be held accountable for. Find what those common KPIs are and stick to measuring and reviewing those. I'd also say get the balance right between quantitative and qualitative KPIs. Quantitative will always be important, right? Targets, metrics, revenue numbers, etc. But the qualitative KPIs are now increasingly more important. What does collaboration look like across the team? How effective are the team at working together to build strategy? How effective are the team at building stakeholder advocacy and consensus? And if today you have no measures of doing that, I would say start to look out into the industry for solutions that can really help you to start to gauge what your customer experience is like and to start to learn from that so you can continuously improve how your team operates.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, well, I have a few questions to start with, so just to get the ball rolling, and just actually one other reminder that this session is being recorded to allow it to be edited and added to the YouTube channel for reference later. So. Just to let you know that. But Danny, just to recap slightly, that kind of terrifying slide you had at the start in terms of the complexity of the sales process. I think anybody who's been looking at the ICT industry over the last few years has seen that manifest, that sales cycles are longer and more complex. But what are the influences there that are adding that kind of complexity? Because it seems that everything that the technologists and the vendors are trying to sell are trying to reduce the complexity of what people have to do. So why is it, why are those things complicated at the moment, and what's happening with them?
Well, I think it started after the last financial crash, actually, where I think a lot of organizations simply became really risk averse, and they felt, putting all of those kind of central buying in one organization was not the way to move forward. And of course, since then, we now rely so heavily on technology and solutions and tools, and those tools are often built to operate across functions. So, like an ERP system or a CRM system or a whole number of technologies, we've definitely seen an increasing trend towards products that serve many different functions across the business. So rather than have, a buyer in a single unit making those kind of buying decisions, we've seen the evolution of purchase committees. And purchase committees have essentially representatives from all parts of the business. And those decision makers come together, and the challenge for them, of course, is we see, and they tell us this directly, we see them really overburdened with huge amount of vendor options, data overload, and they find it very, very challenging to actually make decisions and get to an end result. So hence why you mentioned about sales cycles getting longer and longer, and that's absolutely true. A lot of that is simply because of the large number of decision makers from different functions, each with their own priorities and motivations and buying criteria, right? How do you bring them to some form of consensus to move forward? And unfortunately, we see where vendors struggle to engage, what often happens is those customers default to quite a commoditized solution. The vendors just simply, aren't able to make progress into influencing thinking. So you get what we would call a low quality deal. So long sales cycles, low quality deals, and high stagnation, really born out of just that complexity of many different business leaders coming together to buy.
Okay. Well, we have a question in which we'll do in a moment, but just leading on from that, you put up a very interesting stat there about the average time in role, and that has huge implications then for the longer sales cycle. So what can be done to sort of bridge the gulf between those in particular? Because if you have even experienced salespeople who are cycling through the roles so quickly and a heavy churn rate, but you may have people coming in inheriting sales processes that are in train for quite some time. How do you begin to deal with those disparate?
Yeah. I think, look, I think, we're at a pivotal moment where we have an amazing opportunity to rethink what sales is all about, frankly. I come from a sales background myself, was spent many years in sales. I know we have a dodgy reputation, and rightly so in some cases, right? But I would broadly say that, look, salespeople, I think there's an opportunity to rethink what sales is all about. And fundamentally, we've got to move away from traditional style of selling to be much more customer centric, first and foremost, as I said earlier, but also to figure out how do you collaborate with other experts across the team. No longer can a single salesperson know everything about a complex solution. No longer can they navigate through all those different decision makers. They need support from marketing, from product, from technologies, from partners, really to be able to make sense of it all and deliver a result. So, I think we leaders in our industry have an opportunity to rethink the skills, capabilities of what sales is all about, and to think about not just hiring, those skills, but actually how do you take your current teams and transition them to that way of working where it's collaborative, right? Where it's customer centric, as I said, where it's focused on the quality of how the team works together and the impact they have on the customer around consensus building and changing their mindset. They're the kinds of skills that I think we need to transition to. And I think, to go back to your point, I think I would find that a lot more compelling as a career, right? I'm going to be learning these new skills. I'm going to be, highly engaged. This is going to be something working in a collaborative way, focus on the quality of what I do. I think that's a much more rewarding career for any salesperson.
So rather than try and accommodate that kind of churn rate, it may actually arrest it.
I believe so. I believe so. I mean, there are a lot of proud sales professionals out there who see the world has changed, want to learn new skills, would love to be working better collaboration with different parts of their business. But the way we work today is not often set up to enable them to do that.
Very good. Okay, well, that takes us nicely into the question here, where they're talking about companies struggling to get marketing and sales alignment. So the question is, are there any good examples of what people are doing now to achieve that marketing and sales and customer success alignment?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we help companies do this, right? And I think fundamentally it's actually going back to understand the different kinds of customers that you're engaged with, the different cohorts, and actually just lift the lid on what does that purchase experience look like. And then working together, marketing, sales, and customer success, to really think about how are we going to create highly engaging sales messaging to connect into those companies. And that doesn't necessarily mean very flashy e-brochures or LinkedIn campaigns. Customers are fundamentally saying, teach me something new about my business. Give me an insight that's going to help me survive through this crisis and actually thrive into the future. And if you can, that is not marketing can't do that alone. Sales can't do that alone. That has got to be a collaborative effort, not just across the functions, but also from the leadership within that business to think about, okay, let's take a step back and let's really think about how our customers buy, what are they really looking for, and how do we engage them with some new level of insight that separates us from others. And again, that has to be a collaborative effort. And that might sound, well, how do you do that, right? And it's good old-fashioned strategy planning. But the great thing is, if you break it down to looking at different verticals, different industries, different customer personas, you can actually quite quickly get to a kind of repeatable, templatized approach that works quite well, and put some tools and technologies around that, wrap it around that to try and automate that process, and you're heading in the right way.
Okay. Well, we have another question in here, which neatly kind of dovetails with one I had myself, in terms of, in these new sales cycles that are highly digitized as well, what are the skill sets that the salesperson needs to adapt to this? And on the other side as well, then what are the changes experienced by the salespeople in dealing with the new digital buyer?
I think I think the skills that we need are just human skills, right? Good human skills that perhaps we've lost track of a little bit in the last while, with maybe our over focus on kind of technology and AI and machine learning as the answer, right? In my mind, selling is fundamentally about curiosity and being able to really, genuinely be interested in your customer, their business, their problems, their objectives, their goals, and actually to be able to work with them to find new ways to propel their business forward, right? So they are, in my mind, they're human skills. I think we need to set salespeople up for success. We need to prioritize those kinds of skills in how we hire and how we develop, and the learning and development programs that we put into our business. Collaboration, curiosity, a lot of the stuff that you do so brilliantly on the technical side of defense, on the product side, right? Around being able to test, experiment, try new things out. It's okay to fail. Learn from those experiments so that as a team you do it better next time around. So they're the kinds of, I think, qualities and skills that the businesses need to start prioritizing and moving away from perhaps the more traditional sales programs of old.
Okay. Well, you mentioned in the presentation earlier about a willingness to pay more for a better customer experience.
Yeah.
So what are the kinds of things that people are looking for in it? You mentioned things like tailored content and those kinds of things, but what else can be added to improve that customer experience? Because again, one of the things that's being seen in the ICT industry at the moment is a greater reliance on vendors and service providers to have those insights and add value to the solution stacks that they're providing by knowing how they can support a business. And consequently, they become technical partners as opposed to mere vendors or suppliers. So how do you go about providing that kind of level of and utility to the customer in that cycle?
Yeah, again, it's looking at those workflows that you do. Fundamentally, as you quite rightly said, customers are saying, if I'm going to take the time to speak with you, even if it's early in the engagement, I'm not willing to sit there and just answer questions and then for you to take that off. I need you to come prepared, know my industry, know my business, know the trends and themes that are at play, add value immediately. So rather than in the past where sales would do quite an open-ended discovery type call, you just will not have the opportunity to do that again. You have got to put in your research. You've got to get together with the wider team, talk about the strategy of engagement, be prepared with insightful case studies or documents, ideally diagnostic tools. If you have tools like that to use, you need to have them in your arsenal from the first engagement, because you won't get too many chances to make an impact and create that differentiation. Now, the question is, as you asked, well, how do you automate that? How do you turn that into a systematic approach? And that's fundamentally what RevOps is about. It's about looking at workflows. How do you instead of having teams work in silos, how do you bring them together to collaborate around the customer? And some companies are using collaboration tools like Slack, project management tools, etc. Our own product, Animus, is primarily focuses on enabling that collaboration across functions. But fundamentally, look, I think this is a human problem for humans to solve, right? It's good planning, good strategizing, good teamwork, good collaboration. I think businesses just need to find ways to enable that and value that, recognize it's happening.
Okay. Well, we have some polls today as well, just to get some insights from the audience as well. So, Donna, if you could line up the first poll there, and we'll just jump on to the next question while people are seeing that. But that human element really is central, and I'd like to come back to that because there would always be sometimes, if the numbers aren't looking good, everybody's had that end of month or end of quarter meeting where there's a scramble to bump up the numbers. So when that kind of very familiar and traditional panic sort of sets in. How do you combat regressing to those old habits when you're trying to institute this new RevOps culture?
Well, I think sales will always, that quantitative element will always be there, right? There will be a target, there will be, phasing towards that target. Teams will be reviewed weekly, monthly, etc., and that's always going to be part of it. But I genuinely believe there's another side to that coin that we need to focus on, and that's the quality of that sales engagement. Right? How do you turning a low commodity deal into a high quality deal? That's the key. And that fundamentally is shifting the mindset and the culture away from just looking at the tactical outputs, right? The revenue number, but actually getting the balance right and looking at the inputs. So the team account planning, the strategies they're working on, the quality of the sales messaging. If you start to implement some measures around customer experience, like what are we seeing that translated into a better customer experience? And I think if you get there, and it's tricky, right? And I it's going to take time for businesses to shift away from the end of quarter dash. That will always be there, I think. But I think week on week, if you get the balance right with looking at some of the qualitative indicators, hitting that end of quarter number becomes a lot more predictable, becomes a lot more secure than just focusing on the outputs.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to share the poll results then. They're quite interesting. That in the last 3 years, have your teams found the customer engagement cycle has become more complex? And overwhelmingly, it has, with a few even saying that it has become highly complex. So I suppose that's broadly reflecting the proportions that you had earlier from different studies. So that's an interesting response there. But just kind of moving on then, when people are looking at this, and RevOps is a great term to add to the lexicon we've already got. If you're looking at trying to move to this RevOps model, what are the first kind of key steps, particularly for those organizations that may have had and still have a very traditional sort of sales approach that is very focused on, maybe a little bit over focused on quantity and maybe not so readily focused on quality. So those kind of first steps towards pivoting to this new culture.
Yeah, I think, as a general rule of thumb in this new world, the first thing you think about is customer, right? I would absolutely say if you're not looking at any measures of customer experience, whether that's NPS or other kinds of measurement, go back, get your account managers to have those discussions and ask what that purchase experience was like. So get it firsthand from your customers, and ask them what worked well and where some of the gaps were. I think that's a really important thing to do that. I think the second thing then is many of these answers actually exist in your business already. I find marketing will have a view of the world. Sales can add to this conversation. Similarly with product, tech, customer success, bring the team together. And I would say try and identify, those kind of common measures of success that you can align those functions to. So instead of some of the team focused just on volume and the other team focused on quality and outcome, align those KPIs to the customer purchase experience, and how as a team can we take responsibility for those KPIs, and let's build that into our performance management process. So again, we're not just looking at lead volume or revenue outcomes, but we're doing that, but we're also looking at the quality aspects. And once you start to transition to that model of collaboration and dialogue and working together, there will be constant learnings out of that almost immediately, which will help you tweak and refine your revenue model. And I think you support that then with some technologies to kind of make that process easier, sharing collaboration, banking learnings, refining processes, highlighting things that failed and didn't work is really important. I think if you focus on those 2 or 3 things to begin with, you're certainly starting in the right place.
Okay. Well, we'll get Donna to put up our second poll then, and we'll just move on slightly then. one of the things that may arise out of this in terms of the collaborative process in particular is the fact that when bunches of new teams work together, even with the best frameworks and the best intentions, there can inevitably be frictions there. So what have you seen in terms of maybe some of the pitfalls when people start to implement these models? Where are the typical clashes that occur, if there are such?
Yes, of course there are. Absolutely. I mean, this is a transformation in some ways. So there's always going to be friction. And, I think the approach that's worked very well when we help customers is to have that early discovery, early exploration session together with the teams present, and really to not only identify their current process, but get everybody to work on redefining what the future process will look like. What does that collaborative, highly agile coming together of those teams, how does that look like day to day? And then out of that process, we usually do get them to work on building their own role and responsibility. And what you get from that kind of approach is you get an incredible sense of ownership, obviously, with different teams, but you really get to see a level of empathy and understanding building between those groups. Because when you get a better understanding of what the challenges the marketeer faces on the ground, or the salesperson faces on the ground, or the customer success person, everyone's in it together and they can actually contribute and understand. So, and that's exactly what you want to do in terms of building that collaborative approach. So yes, there are friction. Don't hand out here's the playbook, folks. Here's the new RevOps strategy. You got to bring the team together and build it together. And if you do it that way, people come with you and you get an incredible sense of ownership and accountability.
Okay. I'm just sharing the results then of the poll. So we asked to what extent your business focuses on creating that tailored messaging and commercial insights to increase the customer experience. And it's interesting to see that everybody does it to some extent. So is that tallying with what you're seeing in the market in general?
No, it's yes and no. I mean, I think it differs greatly depending on obviously the size of the company, the maturity, where they are in their own development. What I would say is, it's there are different levels of messaging and marketing content being built today, and we're all probably very familiar with the thought leadership articles, the e-brochures, the top 10 lists of this. I mean, they're constant. So everybody is doing actually a pretty good job, right? But that's not the point. The point is, how do you separate yourself out from the crowd? How do you create that differentiation? So when I say about, tailoring content and having it very personalized to the client, you've got to think of, well, so are the other guys, right? My competitors are all thinking in the same way. So, this is where the skill piece comes in, and actually to create really great commercial insights for companies, you've actually got to get deep into those stakeholders, deep into that group we talked about, to really, really understand their business objectives, where they want to go, to help create that differentiation and that commercial insight. So we're good at doing it kind of, at a high level. And, we've all got very good at churning content out, and our digital channels are fantastic. And it's, it's constant. I'd say fantastic, brilliant, but that's only getting you kind of where everyone else is. The question now becomes, how do you create something that's truly compelling at a customer and a stakeholder level? And I think that's probably where we need to move to.
Okay. Well, we're just coming up on time now, so I'll just ask you for a final word of advice, briefly, if you will, just for the IT professional who might be tasked with supporting a sales team that's pivoting to this approach and engaging in those more collaborative activities. So what do they need to look out for, and what can they maybe bring to the table in supporting this?
Well, they play a pivotal role in this, and although it's not explicitly called out in that RevOps model I showed, the whole point here is that there is a process of engagement with customers, and we know that solutions we're selling today predominantly have a technical element. Every touch point with the customer is an opportunity to learn, in my view, and product and technology need to be part of that engagement. I think the more insights they get from a client, obviously it gives them more guidance in terms of value and feature set and priorities in terms of product development. But also, they play a critical role in actually doing the technical qualification of the customer and the opportunity. And actually, anytime in my experience, where you bring the technologists into the discussion, into the account early, they always bring insights that you never would have even thought of. They will always have a different perspective that's beneficial, and where it kind of changes the way you think about engaging with the customer. So they play a really important role in actually helping create that differentiation. That commercial insight doesn't always have to be commercial; it can be a technical insight that makes a difference. So in that new world, I see that team that's wrapped around the customer, absolutely, including the product and technology teams.
Very good. Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you very much. There's some really good information there and some great insights for anyone who might be embarking on or looking to research that RevOps model. So, Danny, thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to share my screen now just to give you some additional information. Just some of our upcoming sessions. So next week, we're going to have education and training for IT professionals in change-led organizations. So we've been looking quite a lot about how change can become a function in modern organizations, and how once you're good at that change, it can help everywhere. But obviously skills and constant continuous professional development are keys within that. So we'll have Mary Cleary from the Irish Computer Society and the ICS Foundation, and Mark Jordan from SkillNet Ireland to talk about that. Other sessions in the series, we're going to have Carmel Summers on the 29th, talking about aligning the organization's business and human capital strategy for competitive advantage. And just a final reminder then that October is Cyber Month, and there are lots of activities going on around it, and you can check those out on ictskillnet.ie or ICS.ie or several other organizations as well. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Hopefully you found that useful and insightful, and you can check it out on the YouTube channel available from the ICT SkillNet website when it goes online from there, as well as all of the previous editions as well. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you soon at another Lockdown Your Learning session.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this webinar, please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to be kept up to date with all our news, events and programs. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this one.